I'm starting the first stage of this project with some plain tissue paper and one of the IndigoBlu paint mats. I have some lime marmalade acrylic paint, and I'm going to just apply some of that lime marmalade to the paint mat and then randomly dab splodges of the colour onto the tissue paper. And I'm going to need plenty of the tissue paper later on, so I'm going to cover the entire sheet of tissue with splodges of that luscious, lovely lime marmalade paint. When I'm happy with the levels of paint on the tissue paper, I'm going to grab my heat gun, give it a blast before moving on. Next up, I'm using the banana custard acrylic paint, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing, this time applying a little bit more of that yellow paint in between the splodges of the lime marmalade. Again, I'm going to cover the entire of the tissue paper and then bring out the heat gun to make sure it's all nice and dry. For the next step, I'm using the Postbox red acrylic paint. This time, I'm going to add some of the red paint onto the paint mat, add a little bit of water, make it a little bit more runny, and then using the paintbrush, I'm going to splatter the red paint across the tissue paper. And when I'm happy, I'm going to bring up my heat gun to make sure it's all nice and dry before moving on to the next step. The next colour I'm going to introduce is the Goldfinger metallic acrylic paint. And like the red, I'm going to add some to a paint mat, so add some water, mix it, make it nice and flowing, and then I'm going to splatter the gold all over the tissue paper. And once again, when I'm happy with the level of the gold on the paper, I'm going to bring out the heat gun and make sure everything is perfectly dry before moving on to the next step. Now it's time to do some stamping, and I have the new Wild Poppy stamp set. I'm using the smallest of the floral stamps. I've already trimmed these out. As you can see, they are deeply etched red rubber stamps, and using the jet black Archival ink from Ranger, I'm going to completely cover the tissue paper with these floral images. So I'm going to completely stamp everything, I mean cover the entire piece, but obviously this is going to take some time, so I'll just show you starting off and then I'll jump to the end where I've completely covered the entire sheet. And there's the entire sheet covered in that fabulous poppy print. I'm going to pop that to one side now and work on step number 2. So this is a sheet of 12 by 12 cardstock. I have the paint mat, and this time I have the Ruby Slippers metallic acrylic paint, a lovely red metallic paint. And I'm going to randomly paint the entire 12 by 12 sheet once I've added a little bit of water just to thin it down a bit. And I'm going to go over the paper and I'm going to make sure that I've got an uneven coating on the paper. I want to be able to show the paint marks. I want it to be uneven, darker in some areas and lighter in others. Even though the paint has been watered down, it still maintains that lovely metallic luster. Once the 12 by 12 is covered, I'm going to bring out the heat gun and make sure it's all nice and dry before moving on to the next step. When it's dry, I will hold it up to the camera so you can see that lovely sheen from that metallic paint. So I'm going to do some more stamping, this time with the larger of the poppies from that stamp set. And again, with the Archival ink, the jet black Archival ink, I need around about 14 of these big poppies. So I'm going to stamp all over the sheet of paper with that stamp. And as this is a bit of a repetitive process, I'll show you doing the first 2 or 3 and then I'll jump to the end where I've completely covered the entire sheet. So there's my entire sheet covered in those beautiful poppy images, and now I'm going to grab a pair of scissors and, believe it or not, I'm now going to fussy cut every single one of those poppies out of the sheet. So as I've said before, this is going to be a bit of a repetitive process. It is going to take me quite a long time to cut all of these poppies out, so I'll show you doing the first one and then I'll jump to the sections later on to show you the progress. So that's 1 down, another 13 to go. About halfway through, still another 7 to go. And that's the last one. That's all of the poppies all cut out. For the next stage, I need to create a cone. So I'm using the Damage to Mask 12x12. This is the peppermint tea green one. And using a pair of circle scissors, I need to cut a circle around about 12 inches in diameter. I'm just about going to get that out of this sheet, but as you can see, it does go off a little bit, but that's fine because I will be cutting a section of this circle out. So I'm just adjusting the cutters to 4 inches. I'm also going to cut a circle 4 inches diameter from the centre of that 12-inch circle. So to create my cone shape, I'm going to cut a slit right the way through, and then I can fold the arc, if you like, all the way around on itself to create that cone shape. But I'm going to have a lot of wastage. So I've already done a template that I created earlier on as a test piece. So I'm just going to grab that template now and overlay that onto my circle so I know how much of that circle shape I actually need. So as you can see, I'm just marking the places where I know I'm safe to cut it off. So just marking those sections now so I can trim those bits out from that circle, and then I know how much I've got to play with, how much I've got to be able to overlap and make adjustments on the sizing where needed. So when I'm happy with the shape, when I'm happy with the sizing, I'm going to bring back all of those big poppy images, and now I'm going to glue them down to cover the entire of that cone shape. So once I've started sticking the poppies down onto the cone, it's going to be a bit of a repetitive process. So I'll show you doing the first couple, and then I'll jump to the end where I've covered the cone with all of the poppies. So just adding the last of the poppies onto that background, and I'm going to pop it to one side, leave that to dry so that I can now work on the next stage of the project. So this is a paper mache bust from IndigoBlu, and you remember that tissue paper? Well, now we're going to use it. So the entire piece of tissue paper is now going to get torn into little pieces. So I'm going to tear it into small squarish fragments, and once I've torn the entire sheet up, I'm going to start gluing it down to cover the entire of that paper mache bust. So once I have all of my fragments done, there they are, I'm going to grab my super thick Slap It On, which is a gloss gel medium from IndigoBlu, and I'm going to use the gloss gel medium and cover the entire of the bust with those tissue fragments. Now I'm using the gloss gel medium rather than a Mod Podge because A, it's IndigoBlu, and B, it's glossy and shiny, and I know it will dry very, very quickly, which is absolutely perfect for this kind of project. And again, because this step is quite repetitive, I'll show you doing the first bit, and then I'll jump to the end where I've just completed the entire coverage. So now my bust is completely covered and completely dry and looking fabulous. It's time to bring back that poppy cone, and now I've got to try and fit it and adjust it so that it fits snugly around her waist. So there's a little bit of adjusting to do, a little bit of snipping, cutting and trimming just to make sure it gets the best fit, and then I'll fix it and glue it down into position. Now we also notice the green bits around the bottom. I'm also going to trim those away as well, so it just leaves the frilly edge of the poppy flowers along the bottom of the cone. So once I've added the glue, I'm going to fit the skirt back round her, and then I'm going to pop her to one side and let her dry naturally. Next up, I have the Big Butterfly 2 stamp. I'm going to just place it down onto some 12 by 12 white cardstock and roughly draw around the stamp shape. This will give me a bit of a positioning. When I add colour to the cardstock in a little while, I'll know pretty much where I'm going to stamp over the top, so I've got an idea where the colours will be. So this is the Ruby Slippers metallic paint once again. I'm going to add some to my craft mat, add a little bit of water, give it a mix just to make it a little bit more fluid, and then I'm going to paint just over the sections where I know my butterfly wings are going to go. This gives me an idea of where the colours will appear on the butterfly wings when I finally stamp them. So when I'm happy with the red colour, I'm going to bring out my heat gun just to give it a quick blast, then I can add the next colour. The next colour is that lime marmalade again, to tie all the colours together that we've used so far. So again, just painting it roughly down onto the cardstock in the areas that I know the butterfly wings are going to go. And then because I want to add a little bit more of contrast and the colour blending, I'm going to add some splodges of the green into the red. Because it's dry, it's not going to make mud, and then I'm going to grab the red and add some of that into the green as well. Once the butterflies are stamped in place, you'll see that it adds a bit more interest than just having solid colours. So once those butterfly shapes are dry, I'm going to bring out the jet black Archival ink and ink up my big butterfly stamp, and then using the rocker block, and this is a rocker block from Crafter's Companion, I can just rock that butterfly down pretty much in the position where I want it. So it just helps using the rocker block to position the stamp exactly where you want it in that area that you've already painted down. It also really helps to get a crisp and even impression with the stamp. Now that I have my coloured butterflies, I'm going to grab a pair of scissors and then I'm going to fussy cut the butterfly shapes from the cardstock. I'm not going to be bothered with the body of the butterfly or the antenna. All I'm concerned about is having the wings. Once I've cut both of the butterfly shapes out from the cardstock, I'm going to turn them over and just give them a coating of the Ruby Slippers red paint all across the back. You'll see why. Once I've added a black border of that jet black Archival ink all the way around, what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue the two sets of butterfly wings together. I'm going to back them so you've got butterfly pattern on both sides. Now if these butterfly patterns are not symmetrical, this will help to disguise any overlap of the butterfly shapes, but as it happens these butterfly shapes are pretty symmetrical, so you can back them without too much worry. And as you can see, they're a pretty close fit. So all I need now is just to glue them together. Once the glue has grabbed and dried sufficiently, we can add them to the back. You can see that I've already trimmed off that green from around the bottom of the skirt. So I'm going to add a foam pad just onto the butterfly wings and then stick them down onto the back of the bust. Looking good. Next up, I'm going to work on the stand. So this is the wooden stand, and I have the Emerald City metallic acrylic paint, again from IndigoBlu. I'm going to cover the entire of the base in that metallic green paint. I also need to paint up the stem of the doweling, because that's going to go right the way through the centre of the bust to, well, create the stand, if you like. So I need to make sure that the green goes right the way up the stem too. When I'm happy with the level of the green paint, I'm going to bring out the heat gun, give it a real good blast to make sure it's all totally dry before moving on to the next stage. Now that the stand is dry, I'm going to bring back that lime marmalade acrylic paint that we used earlier. Oh look, I've got green fingers. And using a natural sponge, I'm going to just go around the bottom and up the side of the doweling, just to give it a kind of mottled, almost a grassy feel. And then when I'm happy with that green paint, I'm going to just bring up the heat gun to make sure it's all nice and dry before moving on. And then going to grab some PVA glue just to squirt a little bit into the hole of the base, and then I can push the doweling rod into it to make sure that when it dries it's going to be totally secure. So just wiping off the glue, or the excess glue there, and then I've also wiped off a little bit of that lime marmalade, so I'm just going to put it back on again very quickly. So happy with the base, so I'm going to just pop that to one side to dry, and then I can work on the next stage. So using that Emerald City metallic paint, once again I have a sheet of thickish paper. It's not cardstock and it's not real paper, it's somewhere in between. And I'm going to completely cover the A4 sheet of paper. It's almost the same size as 8.5 by 11, standard letter size if you're American. And I'm just going to randomly paint across the page. Again, kind of sketchy, don't want it perfect coverage. Give it a quick dry, and then make sure both sides are done. And then I'm going to grab that lime marmalade once again, and using the same sponge that I used earlier, I'm just going to go over the page and add that mottling so it kind of blends in and matches the base and the doweling. And again, when I'm happy with the levels of mottling on that metallic, I'm going to just bring up the heat gun to make sure it's all nice and dry. Once it is dry, I'm going to grab a small floral punch from Stampin' Up. I've just trimmed off one of the edges of the paper, and I'm going to punch out lots and lots of these little flower shapes from the metallic green. And grabbing hold of my FERN green Archival ink, I'm going to use an ink blending foam and just go over the backs of those little flowers, just in case any of them curl up so you won't see the stark white behind. It's more of a disguising effect than anything else. Once they're done, I'm going to just shape them, grab some PVA glue, and then add a row of those green flowers all the way around the top of her poppy skirt. So that's the top row added. I've also added one or two just into the actual skirt itself. Next, I'm going to use the same piece of paper and a smaller, almost like a clover punch, and punch quite a few of those out, and then we're going to create a row of these flowers around her neck. Again, using that FERN green Archival ink, I'm just going to disguise the white on the backs, just in case any gets seen. And again, just using that PVA glue, just going to create that row around the neckline, just to create like a little clover, almost a clover effect necklace. So once the waistband, the flowers on the skirt and the ones around her neck are all dry, I'm going to decorate each one with a self-adhesive pearl just into the centre of the ones on the skirt and all the way around her waistline. For her clover effect necklace, I'm going to add a self-adhesive gem into the centre of each one. So I'll now give you a complete 360-degree turn so you can see the gems and the pearls in place. I now want to add 3 of those self-adhesive pearls just onto the body of the butterfly wings, just to give that a little bit of decoration, and that will just about finish her off. So using a scalpel, I created a small hole in the base of the bust so I can just insert that rod all the way up to create the stand for the Poppy Fairy bust. And there she is. I hope you've enjoyed watching my very first project as an official member of the IndigoBlu International Design Team. If you have, please give the video a thumbs up, share the video with all your friends, and if you haven't subscribed to the IndigoBlu YouTube channel, you can do so by clicking the button at the end of this video. That's all from me. I'll see you all again real soon. Bye for now.